We're going to go ahead and start our energy roundtable. So if you could make your way back into the room, that would be great. Or if you're having conversations, take them a little further into the hallway. All right, we're going to get started. So Western energy production is indispensable to meeting national energy demands. And because of this, the West is in a strong position to lead the development of energy systems that make the best use of land and resources, balancing technical, economic, environmental, and cultural considerations. The West also contains many of the communities and rural areas that are being affected or will be affected by the energy transition. So continuing to lead in energy innovation and technologies is a key priority for economic development and prosperity for all of our governors. The Infrastructure Act includes a great deal of funding for investments in developing new energy technologies, and as we've heard from several of our speakers already, Western states are positioning themselves to take advantage of those new programs and funds. So to teach us a little bit more about that, we have a great panel today. I'm pleased to have Secretary Ken Wagner here from Oklahoma, the Secretary of Energy and Environment, and he will take it away.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. What a great panel before us. So what a treat this is for me. I'm Secretary of Energy and Environment here in the state of Oklahoma. So I have oversight over 10 major agencies and that include our water and environmental agencies, as well as our public power authorities and some oil and gas regulation as well. But I have two experts with me that can talk about the issues that I think face a lot of what we're seeing in the western states, certainly here in Oklahoma, topics that are really dominating the news every day, and things like energy transition, carbon management. What is the role of oil and gas moving forward into the future? What does a power generation mix look like, particularly in states that have differing resources like our states here? So I'm really pleased to introduce to you. I'll introduce them both, and then I'll just lob some questions at them, and we could talk for long past what we've got allotted. So Glen Murrell, Dr. Glen Murrell, is the executive director of a new, relatively new energy authority in Wyoming, where they consolidated several cabinet-level positions into one single energy authority. He is well suited to do that. He has his doctorate. I can't pronounce the name of it. It's some exotic locale. And the first thing you'll actually know about Dr. Murrell is that he's not from here. And so I think his accent's regional, maybe Alabama. I'll let you experience it for yourself. But but he's done many things, including a stint here in Oklahoma with Baker Hughes, GE Baker Hughes, and maybe his daughter was even born here. So we still claim him, although Wyoming claims him a little more right now. So and then the other thing you'll hear is we're a little competitive with each other on some hydrogen initiatives. And then Matt Fry is with an organization that I know quite well, and that's the Great Plains Institute, and we've been involved here in Oklahoma in the Carbon Capture Coalition and their state coalition on carbon management issues for many years. We actually hosted their annual meeting 2 years ago in 2019. Matt's former boss now, Brad Crabtree, is moved on to really a position that we're all benefit from. He is now the confirmed Assistant Secretary of the Department of Energy in the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, and has been a lead voice in carbon management. And Matt has certainly taken that mantle and run across the country, and I believe recently was appointed to a prestigious position at the National Academies of Science. And so I think I'll start there. Matt, why don't you tell a little bit about what you do at Great Plains and the Carbon Capture Coalition, and maybe why carbon management, specifically carbon capture, utilization, and storage, matters for meeting climate goals.
You bet. Can you all hear me? Cool. So I'm going to run through a few slides to address this question generally, and then we can dig deep into the weeds if that works for you, Ken. So this presentation is generally on state and federal policy drivers for carbon management. And when I talk about carbon management, I talk about the full suite. So we look at capture, we look at transportation, we look at storage, the full spectrum of utilization, and then we also include hydrogen in this discussion, because I think that as we talk about hydrogen, we're going to be looking at carbon capture associated with that, at least in the near term when we start talking blue hydrogen and so forth. So these are, required slides. You have to tell everybody who the Great Plains Institute is. We're an independent, non-governmental organization, and we have a focus on energy policy and technology. And our carbon management objectives are to elevate carbon capture nationally, provide comprehensive policy support, and then foster economy-wide deployment of carbon capture technologies. So to dig into the question that Ken asked, we'll talk first about our federal drivers and the opportunities associated with them. First will be the 45Q tax credit, and then the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the 45Q tax credit, it's been around for many, many years. It kind of expended all of its capacity back in the early 2000s, and there were a multi-year process to reform that and expand it. So in 2018, that reform was completed with the Future Act. Associated with that, most applicable to the discussion today, is you get a $35 per ton tax credit if you utilize CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, a $35 per ton tax credit if you utilize CO2 for any other source of utilization, and then you're provided a $50 per ton credit if you permanently store CO2 in a geologic formation. And just for everybody's information, the current proposed what would have been the Build Back Better law, but whatever it turns out to be in budget reconciliation will increase these dollar figures significantly. So we'd be looking at I think it's 80 per ton for EOR, 80 per ton for other utilization, and then 100, I believe, per ton for geologic storage. And then there's an additional component for direct air capture, which would take those up to about 100, 100, and 150 or something along those lines. So significant opportunities to help in this transition with the 45Q tax credit. In the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there's a lot of opportunity additionally to move forward in this transition. The infrastructure law took into the complete capacity the SCALE Act is proposed. A pretty important opportunity there is the CIFIA program. It kind of follows the model of the TIFIA, or the transportation program, which provides loan opportunities to build out CO2 pipeline infrastructure. It's pretty important if we anticipate this transition. Provides $2.5 billion for storage and validation testing, that geologic information that we require. And then it provides another $75 million for the Class 6 program, whether states are intending to move forward with Class 6 projects independently with the EPA, or if they try to move forward with the primacy opportunities, which is pretty highly interesting, and a lot of people are moving in that direction today. I won't run through these in complete detail, but some of these things are digging directly into that competition that Ken mentioned there a second ago. So there's roughly $15 billion more for opportunity to build out these projects and these programs. The two I'll mention specifically are the direct air capture hubs. I believe that notice of intent was published on Monday, so there's $3.5 billion available for at least 4 regional hubs. And then the regional clean hydrogen hubs, we anticipated that either the funding announcement or the NOI this week, but it hasn't yet been published. But that provides $8 billion for at least 4 hydrogen hubs, and Glen and Ken are competing for those dollars. Now I'll run quickly through some state drivers that can also help push us through this transition. Talk about some statutory framework, financial incentives, and siting assistance. The first thing that states need or should consider as they move forward into this transition is whether they have a statutory framework that allows folks to build out these technologies in their state. Just a few that I'll mention is pore space ownership. When you start looking at capture and storage, entities need to figure out who to move forward with to actually store within their geologic pore space. So it helps from a financial perspective as you're looking at capital investments and folks who are going to loan money for these programs to understand who owns the pore space. Also need to know who owns the CO2 from cradle to grave. It's really important that states consider either unitization or amalgamation statutes. So as these plumes spread, we can kind of work the unitization opportunities as we have in oil and gas over the decades. We need to consider stewardship requirements. A lot of folks call it liability. I prefer to call it stewardship because investors are really concerned about the longevity of companies and their ability to steward these projects in perpetuity, which is required by law. So it's not a technical risk. It's more of a long-term risk associated with a company's longevity. So there's different opportunities and aspects and ways to move forward that. And then states need to put forward a regulatory regime and appropriate dollars for folks to actually implement these programs. A few financial incentives that that states can work with to kind of help make their states more open to business as we move into this transition. A few, and these are not prescriptive. These financial incentives are only limited by what people can think about and what they can get their legislatures to enact. So one opportunity for a financial incentive for a state is to reduce royalty or severance tax if you utilize and store CO2 for enhanced oil recovery. There's opportunities to reduce sales tax or waive sales tax on things purchased in state that result in projects that store permanently CO2 or provide some other opportunity in the transition. You could look at reduced property taxes, and then if states have the capacity, they can provide loans or grants to move these projects forward. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit, siting assistance. Siting is a challenge. That's what we hear about in the news constantly today. So there's opportunities for states to potentially help site pipeline infrastructure. In Wyoming, we did that through a project. There's also opportunities for states to help with geologic characterization. It's expensive and it's challenging. And so their geological surveys or their academic institutions can potentially help to move these projects forward in the subsurface. And then finally, public outreach. The majority of the public outreach that we hear now is negative, and a lot of it's misinformed. So I think if we're actually going to move forward with these projects, implement these technologies, meet climate goals, and maintain reliable energy systems through this transition, we need to educate our public better. That's all I have.
Thanks, Matt. All right. Well, so part of this is about how these tools and techniques and alternative fuel sources affect the economies, right? What is the economic development opportunities for rural Oklahoma and rural Wyoming, which is a great part of both our states. So for us, this energy diversity, including hydrogen, is really a commercial opportunity. We're both energy producing states. One advantage that Glen State has over us is they're one of two states to actually have primacy for Class 6, which is the permit you need from EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act to actually store carbon in geologic storage. What most people don't know, and Matt did a great job of showing that we've got tax incentives to do carbon capture. There's $10 billion for actual CCUS in the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's $5 billion for direct air capture, which if you capture the carbon, you got to do something with it. And then the money that surrounds blue hydrogen. Well, what most people don't know is that you've got only 15 people in the entire country outside of the two states with primacy that can actually work on Class 6 permitting. And so, and that's an EPA issue, right? They don't have the funding to go, they can't raise capital, and they have to go to Congress to actually increase that capacity. So states like Wyoming that have Class 6 primacy already are in a really great position. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the Energy Authority and your plans around carbon capture, and then we can spar a little bit about hydrogen.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary Wagner. And I'm not going to tell you where I'm from. It's Alabama is deep south, but my accent's even deep south. So I'll let you all guess. So my name's Glen Murrell. I'm the Executive Director at the Energy Authority in Wyoming, and the Energy Authority is a very small agency. In fact, it's not technically an agency. It's a instrumentality of the state. And we were formed through the merger of a couple of other entities to provide a hub of coordination within Wyoming. If you look at Wyoming's state government structure, it's very dispersed. There's a lot of different agencies touching energy, but there's no Department of Energy, as there is a Department of Agriculture, for example. There's no equivalent in Wyoming for the energy sector, which brings benefits and problems there. So they created the Energy Authority to act as a coordinating hub to bring everything together and make sure everybody was pulling on the same rope at the same time. However, there are only 4 people in the office. We have a 12-person board, but there's only 4 people in the office. Typical, that's government work, right? So how do we affect anything when we're trying to influence an energy economy the scale of Wyoming? Wyoming has the 3rd largest energy economy in the country. If it were a country, it'd be the size of Norway, and Norway is no slouch with respect to energy production. So how do 4 people and a person with a funny accent influence an entire state apparatus to pursue the right thing? Well, the legislature, when they formed the authority, they made us the curators of the energy strategy for Wyoming. So it's written in law that we have to develop, administer, communicate, and update the Wyoming energy strategy. And I'm reciting it from memory. I've read it so much. And that's the tool that we use to help everybody else in the state go down the right path. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the energy strategy, except to say it's really a visionary, it's a vision for transformation of a traditional energy economy in such a way that it stays relevant and sustainable in a decarbonized world. And so if you look at the energy economy in Wyoming, it's coal, oil, gas, thermal, renewable, a bunch of uranium. Potentially in the future, there's advanced reactors, there's carbon management system, there's potential for hydrogen because we're going to beat Oklahoma. It's very, very broad, right? But it's traditionally hydrocarbon-centric. And if we look where our markets, another interesting aspect is that we export 90% of our product, energy product, ends up outside of our borders. So we're very much beholden to the demands of our consumers. And our top consumer, geocommodity market, is natural gas into California. And the second biggest is coal into Texas. And it doesn't matter really where you look in terms of geocommodity markets, the demand currently, and it's increasing, is that people want decarbonized energy. It's as simple as that. So if we're going to keep having access to those markets, we have to be aware of that and cognizant of it and accept it, and then ensure that, or proceed to ensure that our energy economy meets those consumer demands. So our primary objective is to have an all-of-the-above energy mix, which I believe Oklahoma shares that, right? Where we are going to utilize every single resource, natural and infrastructure and human, that we can possibly get access to, but it has to be constrained by a net zero aspiration. That's the very, very short version of the entire strategy. All of the above, net zero. And it's driven entirely by market demands. So that's how we push it through. So if you think about that, and you think about the energy base in Wyoming, things like several opportunities come out. There's the heritage projects with respect to our traditional resources. Electrification is a big trend that we have to address too, because that addresses our renewables and storage and other things come in. And then there's a technology opportunity as well. We have one of the first advanced reactor projects in development in the state. It's a natrium reactor out in the southwest, which is a very exciting opportunity. And then if you reduce that even further in terms of initiatives, what is the state really going to do? There are 3 or 4, really, depending on the day of the week. But the number one is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. That is the number one priority for the state with respect to the development and transformation of the energy economy. And I'll talk about why it's number one. The other 2 are hydrogen is the next biggest, because it represents such an incredible prospect or incredible pathway for Wyoming to take traditional resources and deliver them in a decarbonized sense. The third is advanced reactors and the associated value chain around that. That's a new one. It's very welcomed in Wyoming, and we're trying to stay ahead of the curve and not not become trapped by the commodity curse that we have in the past. We wanted to leap on that as an advanced production system and advanced manufacturing opportunity. And then there are other things like rare earth elements and other things that come out as well. But the number one is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. The reason being, there's been a twist though. We have traditionally looked at that for the last 10 years with very blinkers on, where it's been very much about it's a mitigation technology for thermal coal. And so can you retrofit coal-fired power and continue to utilize those resources? And it certainly is still that. But that's not really the problem that we're facing. The problem is that people want decarbonized energy. So we've worked for the last 2 years or so to make sure that the vision in Wyoming with respect to CCUS is not just about thermal coal. It's more about, can you use it upstream and go after blue hydrogen, for example, or you can couple it with biomass and go for BECCS and all the other opportunities that are enabled by CCUS. It's not just about thermal coal, though thermal coal is the big one. There's a sequence to consider as well. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage enables hydrogen in a big way in Wyoming. And if you have carbon capture, utilization, and hydrogen production, then you get into advanced manufacturing processes like in synthetic natural gas, synthetic petrochemicals, synthetic plastics, other things. We talked about diversification, right? It's not just diversification, it's a value add to break the commodity curse that Wyoming has. And then other things like that. The other part of it in Wyoming is that the groundwork, a lot of the groundwork has already been done. We mentioned, Matt Fry mentioned the statutory framework. Wyoming checked those things off over the last 10 years. And in fact, Matt was directly engaged and contributed to many of them. And that is paying off now because, again, we mentioned things like direct air capture. There are several direct air capture projects in development in the state, and I imagine there probably are in North Dakota as well. And they're coming to Wyoming primarily because they know they can get access to Class 6 wells. And that technology, at the moment at least, it's all about beating the market. You have to be first to market in order to secure it. So they don't want to wait for the rest of the country to have a good Class 6 well. There are currently only 2 places in this country they can do it, so they're looking at Wyoming, North Dakota. So all that groundwork's been done. It's coming to a head now. Back to the question really how important CCUS is. It is the kernel technology that we have to solve today. Tomorrow is too late. We have to get that deployed at scale as soon as we possibly can because it enables more and more and more other things to come in on the back end of it.
Yeah, great. And so, I think it's two things I'd talk about is, when you think about an all of the above strategy, I mean, we hear that all the time, but what does that really mean? And in Oklahoma, we view it like a financial portfolio. If you have a diverse portfolio, then you're likely to be able to weather any storm. And inevitably, if you're relying on 100% of everything, something will and often does go wrong. And so we view it in that way. And, we're well known, like Wyoming, for our traditional energy assets. And I mean, we're, the hydraulic fracturing and the first commercial wells were done in Oklahoma. Certainly, we have a long history of fossil energy, but we're still in the top 5 for both production of oil and natural gas liquids. But most people don't know that we're already 50% renewable energy in this state. So we have this tremendous wind resource, and it's deployed really, really strongly through our state. And so we don't produce coal when we do burn coal, we burn it from the Powder River Basin. And so we're a fan of that, but we're down to about 8% utilization in our power sector. So any given day, you're dealing with about 90% of your power being met by some combination of renewables and natural gas. And natural gas has been that balancing agent. So when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing or water's not flowing at the rates that support our hydroelectric power, then natural gas can chase that in a same or similar cost structure. And so, when you look at the Biden 2005 benchmarks for power sector reduction of carbon, in 2020 we hit 50% reduction from those. So we're over 2 times the national average, and we feel like on a mitigation strategy we're doing really well. And the only reason we don't have a great deal more wind and solar and battery already put on our grid is the Southwest Power Pool's interconnect queue and FERC. So for us, we don't really have to set a lot of goals because we have this tremendous sun and wind and water resource that will allow us to continue to grow. So for us is how do we manage that in a way that makes it reliable, resilient, affordable, and clean? Because Glen's right. I mean, we don't need to get into arguments about, man-made climate change. The energy transition is being driven by consumers and investors. And the market tells us that they want more sources of low and no carbon energy. And our job as energy producing states is to deliver on that. And so that's what we've done. And so, when you think about hydrogen, just a quick thing, there's two really main feedstocks for hydrogen. Hydrogen is made from water, where they use carbon-free energy to strip the hydrogen off the oxygen, vent the oxygen into the atmosphere, and you've got, quote, green hydrogen. We prefer to look at it in carbon intensity, but obviously in Oklahoma with 50% renewable, we have great opportunities for green hydrogen. We also have this tremendous natural gas resource, and the other feedstock is methane. And you've got four molecules of hydrogen for each molecule of carbon, and 95% of the hydrogen in today's market is being made in using natural gas feedstock with venting the carbon. The only problem with that is for every ton of carbon you get about 9 tons of carbon. Every ton of hydrogen you get about 9 tons of carbon dioxide. So if you're going to use the more affordable natural gas processes, you've got to deal with the carbon waste. And that's where Glen's point about carbon management comes in. And so, for us, we see hydrogen as a diversification. It's not the magic molecule, but it's thought that most gas turbines can take somewhere between 0 and 30% hydrogen as a augmentation to its natural gas fuel. And certainly for Class 8 trucking, long-haul trucking, EVs are not a great application just because of the size of the battery and the lack of actual cargo space in the trucks. So we see those as two really large opportunities for our state. If you believe in decarbonizing transportation, it's not going to be done via EVs in the short term. EVs will have a longer term effect, and we're all in on the EV economy like you guys are as well. So we really see it as a leveling technology. If during Winter Storm Uri, if we would have had hydrogen to augment our natural gas in our turbines, we wouldn't have had the spot gas prices that we did that really rocked us to the tune of $4 billion of excess gas charges in February of 2021. So we see the potential, and if you believe that there is a true demand to decarbonize transportation industry, then I think the uptake for hydrogen is real, and we'll see it in a much shorter term than what I think people actually think. So, Matt, what is Great Plains doing on the hydrogen side of things?
We would agree that, so we also have all of the above strategy, assuming, as everybody up here said, that it's clean on the back end. So we agree that hydrogen is going to be one of the ways that we get there. We recently developed an analysis that looked at potential hydrogen hubs across the country. Through that analysis, we looked at just what Ken just talked about, the feedstock opportunities, all the transportation opportunities associated and that are already developed in the state, and then potential development transportation opportunities within the state. And from that, we came up with what our analysis showed is the potential for 13 hubs across the country. You can group them and make them less hubs that would be bigger, or more hubs that would be smaller. And ironically, we're sitting in one now, and Glen and I live and work about 30 minutes apart in Wyoming, so we sit in the middle of one in Wyoming. So we're all for hydrogen. I think that one thing that Ken mentioned mentioned is we require reliability moving forward, and the folks that perceive the ability to immediately shut down our fossils and move forward in a totally green energy economy, it's just not the reality that we live in. We just don't have that opportunity. So even if we did convert to solar and wind immediately today, we'd still have the challenges associated with industry. You know, we're not going to get away from concrete. We're not going to get away from steel. Whether we utilize a carbon-free energy source to produce those, you know, just through their chemistry, they vent CO2 just by the way that they're produced. So we have to utilize CO2, CCUS to accommodate those industries in the future. And then we also require transportation, as Ken mentioned. We're not going to immediately turn our entire transportation fleet over. We have trains, we have planes, we have barges, we have large trucks, and our personal transportation opportunities. So we believe that the CCUS component is necessary, and we also believe as we move through this that hydrogen will be one of the primary drivers in our opportunities to move forward in the carbon-free industry.
Thanks. And so talking about hydrogen and for us, again, going back to that winter storm, well, again, we're 90% gas and renewables. Well, during Winter Storm Uri, you know, sub-zero temperatures for more than 10 days, wind and solar went to virtually none. So one day it was 2.5% of the grid, and diesel generation, think backup generators, was 3.5% of our grid. So, you know, that creates intermittent resources do what intermittent resources do. They're variable. But natural gas, we had freeze-offs, you know, when water comes up, produced water comes up in the production, we had freeze-offs in a way that we had never seen in our state before. And so gas never got above 27% of our grid. So that left a huge void. You know how we filled that? The reason we didn't have grid failure? Coal. So thanks to our neighbors in Wyoming, we were able to weather that storm. And you know, we see that those coal plants are scheduled for retirement. So we, as policymakers and working with our utilities, we have to figure out how we become resilient and protected against those things, those real stressors. You know, that was an unforeseeable storm, but as a lawyer, I know that that storm is now foreseeable. And so we have to plan for that, and you can overbuild a lot of renewables, or you can figure out what are those baseload sources that you can call on when something that inevitably is going to go wrong actually does. How are you viewing what you can do? I know you've got this tremendous coal resources, the cleanest, most available coal probably in the world. And I know you mentioned that that's actually a resource for making hydrogen. Yeah,
so you touched on it completely. Right? We're talking about energy diversification, economic diversification, but there's also sustainability and value-added opportunities around, right? And hydrogen does present that with respect to coal. And in fact, we just issued last week it's called a solid fuels to hydrogen RFP. So we're actually throwing a bit of money in there to make sure that people do not forget that coal is actually still the cheapest and easiest way to make hydrogen around. And it's not even new. It's been done for 180 years or so, dating back to the Victorian times with coal gas and town gas is essentially hydrogen from coal. So the question of resilience is very, very important, right? We also have the intermittent sources in Wyoming, but we have the base thermal load as well. And hydrogen helps to create that resilience on both ends. We certainly consider the opportunity for renewable power to be in peak times to be able to convert a little bit of that excess to hydrogen and store it on site in pore spaces or some other means, and that helps build resilience on that piece. It actually enables some of that renewable build out as well, because Wyoming's kind of unique in having very, very high quality wind, but at times it's quite stranded because there's a mountain range between it and the market. So there's actually very high quality wind that is not in development in Wyoming because of economic reasons in terms of access in the market. If you have a value-added opportunity like hydrogen, that actually enables it to build out because they don't necessarily have to build a massive transmission line to get what they need. They can then convert directly to hydrogen on site, start shipping it by pipeline, rail, road, whatever else, store it on site for reconversion at times, and that actually enables the build out of renewables in the state. So that's one piece. The other end is, going back to the coal story, certainly the coal the capture on the back end of that combustion system is a big effort, of course. But if you can do pre-combustion capture by converting that coal to hydrogen, co-firing directly with hydrogen through a natural gas turbine, or co-firing with ammonia on a coal-fired power station, you can do that and immediately get a reduction in the overall emissions profile for the thermal station, and it stays open, right? Which is, if you want a resilient grid, that is the simplest fashion, is to have thermal generation on site with electrical inertia for the system that takes that base load at the right time. So there are multiple angles there, and it's not simply replace this with that and you're good to go. There's hydrogen, like I said earlier, gives multiple opportunities and pathways for diversification of the economy. You can go up the value chain, added value by converting to something else, sustainability in terms of keeping your resources online. It's the more you dig in, the more you start to think, well, this is really an incredible opportunity if we can get it to work.
Yeah. I think when you talk about the grid, one thing that I've been thinking about a lot as we think about the evolution of our grid and retirement of these reliable resources and affordable resources because the markets are demanding that. But what we don't think about is just the increased load from everything, every device, every computer, all the Bitcoin mining, all of the things that are happening in today's economy. The Internet of Things, everything's controlled by some chip computer that requires energy. And so while we're looking at reducing our footprint for carbon emissions and criteria pollutants as well, we're increasing our demand. And you said 90% of your energy goes to out-of-state sources, to markets. Just in our power grid, we produce we only use 72% of the power we actually generate. We send it across state lines, much like you guys, and that doesn't include all the natural gas and oil we produce that is also energy sources we send out of state. But what is that going to do as we add more intermittent sources, but we increase our demand with the electrification of vehicles, electrification of all these other sources, and everything that we do requiring more demand? Matt, have you guys looked at that?
Yeah, we think about this a fair amount because that's one of the other things that it's hard to describe when you look at the increased demand that we have, and as we move into greener, or renewable energy, your surface impacts become substantially greater, I will say. You have to impact a lot of the surface to build these infrastructure. Wind farms take up a lot of space, solar farms take up a lot of space, and folks that have not seen the development of a transmission line, they not only take up a lot of space, but they create some emotional impact as well because they're not very well liked if you haven't seen this process go through. So I think as we move forward, we need to understand that we're going to have to tackle these challenges as well. I mean, nothing's insurmountable, but we need to think about what we're doing to the surface as we move forward and how we're going to abate or mitigate those impacts moving forward as well.
Yeah, Glenn.
Just to layer on there, it's also a very good point. You start to talk about wind farms the size of California, right, to replace the thermal generation that we currently have. But there's also capital, and then the capital requirements for incrementally building out more and more renewables. The more it comes in there, that intermittency has a negative sort of feedback loop on it because you have to keep building more and more and more and more to get a little incremental increase in the actual I can't remember what the technical term is, the base reliability, the capacity factor of the overall grid. The curve goes like this really quickly, right? So there are multiple challenges with it, and if it's simply the business as usual approach of simply building a new renewable source and connecting it to the grid, it's kind of unsustainable in terms of land use and capital deployment. It's hard to imagine once you get somewhere, you guys might be close to that limit, right, where it's that incremental 50% going to 60 and going to 70% is going to get harder and harder and harder to do. And so having some way to balance that out through storage or something else, or continuing to have the thermal base, that's critical for the overall benefit of the grid in terms of resiliency and actually sustainability moving forward.
Yeah. We've actually started looking at these are conversations that you're surprised to hear about in Oklahoma, but we're actually starting to talk about advanced reactors for small modular nuclear reactors, fusion technologies, things like that may not be ready for prime time today, but if we're not looking for it and we see this demand continue, because we're not going to, we don't need to be eliminating sources of energy. We need to be doing more of everything to prepare for this. And, you talk about the unfortunate and very difficult process of siting new power lines. I mean, we had one rural co-op try to do it for a year, and they were replacing a pipe, a set of wires, and they couldn't get it done because of the National Historic Preservation Act. So the state historical, Section 106 of the National Historical Preservation Act requires this, archaeological artifact type that most people don't think of that as an environmental requirement. Well, at the end of the day, they had to put the poles in the exact same place. So they actually had to remove it, do a bypass, and put poles in the exact same place because they couldn't get permitted for poles nearby. And so, I've heard a new term recently. We've all heard NIMBY, not in my backyard, and now it's banana. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. So, nobody wants these things. We all want them, but nobody wants them near them, and they're all going to be challenges. And I think things that we're going to have to see, and I know our governors are very strong advocates of streamlining these permitting processes, not to be unprotective, because we all want protection of our natural resources and our air, land, and water. But if we want to meet the demand for clean energy, we have to take all of those things into consideration. Glenn, what's your experience with that? I know you've got a little bit less population, but you've got some other factors.
Yeah, well, we have to deal with, Matt, what's the number? 40-some% of our land is federal. And so you're quickly into all sorts of difficulties with NEPA process and things like that. So the classic example we use is the Chokecherry Sierra Madre wind farm in Carbon County, 3 gigawatt scale, enormous. They're planning to deliver electricity into Los Angeles eventually through Delta area and Utah ultimately. The planning process, the permitting process has taken so far 12 years. 12 years to get it permitted, right? Which is, you start to see the push out of the East Coast in terms of you have to build more renewables and build more transmission, and we're like, yeah, we'd love to. We're ready to go. Then the other side of the story is back to advanced reactors, the Natrium project. It's another one where it's not necessarily the technology or the development around the site or anything like that that is the big hiccup or the big potential banana skin in the whole process. The potential banana skin is that they have to get permitted and built within 7 years and go through a NRC process, so Nuclear Regulatory Commission or Council Commission, with a matter of a few years. And that's whenever we talk to any experts who's engaged in the space, that's the one thing that gives them any doubt. It's not necessarily the capital deployment, the build, the construction, the design, none of that. It always comes back to how are you going to get your, whatever it is in the NRC, permit to build, I think. How are you going to get your permits? And on that timeline.
So I know we're coming close on time, but we want to, if anybody has any questions, want to field that. With no questions, why don't we just have some closing remarks? Matt, anything that you want? Oh, okay.
All right, I went to the restroom. I know you had mentioned that you had on your slides.
Rudy Montez from Patriot Processing out of Austin, Texas. I was looking at your slides there and showing the carbon capture, where you're actually paying per ton there. Is that kind of, the standard at which you guys are, what it is now? And is that a price that, that's going to be for farmers?
Yeah, that's associated with the IRS's 45Q tax credit. So that's nationally standardized. It's been in effect at that rate since 2018.
The The difference between carbon capture and carbon sequestration, can you kind of highlight what you think that is? Do we know what to pay for the carbon sequestration and carbon capture on a difference on that?
So the capture is the actual capture from the emission point. So whether that be from an industrial source or a thermal source coming out of the stack, you capture the CO2 through typically an amine process or some other process, maybe membrane coming out of the stack. You can also capture it through gas processing, through oil and gas operations coming out of the geology as they produce those hydrocarbons. The sequestration is the portion of the process where you take it and you re-inject it into the subsurface where it stays permanently and stored permanently.
Okay. And how do you see how hydrogen fuel and carbon sequestration lining up in the future?
Well, as Glenn mentioned, I think that, as well as Ken, I think that the early mover on hydrogen is going to be blue hydrogen, and I know that we're trying to get away from these colors because there's 47 different colors of hydrogen at this point, but I think blue hydrogen, which is a fossil-produced hydrogen, is going to be the early mover, and if we want to move to a net zero economy, we're going to have to incorporate carbon capture, and as Ken mentioned, we'll have to store that or utilize it on the back end.
And are you guys using the COMET tool at all that's produced in the USDA?
I'm not familiar with it. Are you guys?
I didn't hear it.
The COMET tool?
Do not know.
You ever have used that?
No.
The reason I was asking is like applying for the carbon sequestration, the carbon climate commodity grant that just passed through for that, and there was a deadline like 2 weeks ago. Talked about the COMET tool that was in there that was used to be utilized with farming. I didn't know if you guys were familiar with that.
I'm not. I'm sorry.
I'm not.
Okay, thank you.
I would have one comment about the colors of hydrogen, not generically about the colors, but if this money that's coming through the Infrastructure Act is really designed to catalyze a low-carbon hydrogen economy, and that's what it's about. And today, there's not a lot of carbon-free hydrogen available in the marketplace. And so if you think about catalyzing an industry, hydrogen itself is ubiquitous. It doesn't know whether it has carbon intensity or not. Its use and scope 3 emissions are carbon free. You're going to have to utilize carbon from as many sources as you can to test this in over-the-road vehicles, because if you wait on simply carbon free, you'll never get to scale anytime quickly. And that the idea is you're removing those scope 3 emissions, and over time, the sources will become cleaner, just like energy does. And so I think that's where people have to really look at it differently. I just think that's the point that's lost when we talk about development of a hydrogen economy and hydrogen as a real fuel source. Glenn, any last words?
Yeah, I would just, well, I certainly agree with what you just said with respect to hydrogen. It's, if you wait for the green hydrogen, right, it's going to be years and it's going to cost a lot more. So if you want to move now, there's only one option. I think the only thing I would add is to finalize is that we just had last week a summit in Wyoming. We went through all the non-traditional new stuff that's going on in the state, and it was a tremendous conference. It was just incredible how many green shoots are coming through. I didn't mean to say green shoots, shoots of growth, right, in the economy, the energy economy overall, and it's a spectacular to see, because I do think that we're going through, I hate to use the word energy transition, but there's a transition of thought and transition of deployment of capital and other things happening, and there's a lot going on. I'm sure the same story in Oklahoma. So it's, I started 1st of July 2020, which is not the best time in anybody's time to start a new job. And I sometimes frequently say that, I probably have said this to Matt, that if I'd started on 1st July of 2018, I have no idea what my job would have been, right? What I would have been working on for the next 2 years. But starting 1st July 2020, it has been nothing but, progress and encouragement, enthusiasm, and a lot of momentum, really, to deploy these technologies into the state and elsewhere, and make this difference real. So it's folks like Matt and Ken and I have been in this space for a decade or more. it's kind of like Christmas at the moment, every day, because there's something new coming in and progress with all this CO2 management stuff that we've been butting our heads against walls for years. It's actually getting done. So it's a good time to be working in this business.
Anything last?
No, I just echo what everybody says here. It's amazing because, yeah, we've been working in this for like 15 years, and it seems like we've just been talking about it. But now things are moving. We're going to actually start breaking ground, turning dirt, and building projects. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I get to teach a couple classes at universities, and I tell the young people that there's never been a more exciting time to be in energy. Literally, it changes daily. The opportunities are almost infinite. And so for states like Wyoming and Oklahoma, our job is to find those niche markets that use our resources in a responsible way, that deals with the emissions to meet the demand for clean energy. And so I think, we want, all of our states in the western states, they all have a unique energy mix and are all striving for the same things, this lower emission, lower carbon future. So look forward to working with the WGA and continuing. So thanks for your attention and listening to us.